Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you all for joining our webinar today, Resiliency and Recovery with Consul. My name is Peter McCarron. I'm a Senior Product Marketing Manager for Consul over at HashiCorp. Joining me today is going to be Cody DeArkland. He's our Technical Product Marketing Manager for Consul, and we're going to be talking about how to set up Consul in a way that is both going to help you with building resiliency in your applications and then also helping you recover. As an FYI, this webinar is being recorded. We are going to post it to our website after post-processing, usually in about 1 to 2 days. Throughout the webinar, feel free to enter your questions into the chat. We'll be answering them both in the chat and then also at the end of the presentation. And let's go ahead and get started. All right. So real quick, just kind of an agenda on what we're going to be covering today. We're going to do a quick intro of Consul and Consul Enterprise. A lot of the features we're going to be talking about today are available on the enterprise version of the software. We're going to talk about specifically resiliency and recovery. So what do we think about when we're saying that, and just how do we approach this problem that's typical for enterprises to be working with? How to solve it with Consul, walking through some of the different features, and then we're going to do a demo. But before we get into any of that, I'm going to toss it over actually to Cody, who's going to set us up with our environment, kind of give you a lay of the land about what we're going to cover towards the end of the demo.
Thanks a lot, Peter. So, hey, everyone. As Peter mentioned, my name is Cody DeArkland. I'm a tech marketing manager at HashiCorp. We're going to talk a little bit about Consul today. And before we jumped in, like Peter said, we wanted to give you kind of a lay of the land because we're going to be jumping through a couple of different environments, and we wanted to really show how we can build this from the ground up. So I'm going to fire up sharing real quick, and we'll get started. All right, we should see my environment up and running. Peter, can you confirm for me that my screen sharing is all good?
You're good to go.
Fantastic. So you should be looking at my vSphere environment. This is an on-prem environment. We tend to do these demos a lot out of public cloud. I wanted to switch it up a little bit and talk a little bit about private cloud, but I want to be specific and say that everything we're doing applies equally to both public and private cloud. A lot of this redundancy stuff we're going to be talking about and resiliency stuff is really about making sure environments are stable and safe, and taking a more proactive approach to how we prevent failures in environments. So that problem spans regardless of which environment or which cloud type you're accessing. So just wanted to set the stage. We're inside of vSphere. This is my vSphere environment. We're going to deploy out deploy out a total of 9 Consul servers today in different configurations, and we'll switch over to my VS Code environment. We can take a look at that. So we have a Terraform manifest here that's going to deploy a set of Consul servers first. That'll be Consul 01 through 03. These are going to be our main server nodes inside of the environment. We're then going to have 4, 5, and 6. 4, 5, and 6 are going to be set up as what we would call redundancy zones, non-voting nodes initially. And what that's going to allow us to do is set that up to have those promote to leaders when failure happens. And Peter's going to unpack that a bit, but just wanted to set the stage. And then finally, we're going to have Consul new. If I scroll down here very quickly. There we go. Consul new 0, 1, 2, and 3. And these are going to be how we talk about automatic upgrades inside of the environment. Quick aside note, these are all deploying a specific template from my environment. I built that template using Packer. So let's see, where's there it is. That template was built using Packer. And I just wanted to more so touch on the fact that you can use Packer to very easily build out images for your environment, right? A lot of us already know this, but I was able to actually take this and build out kind of my entire Consul environment, including the Envoy stuff, so I can use Service Mesh, different configurations for the environment. Just as an example, you can see this is the templated configuration file that I've set up. Automatically handles grabbing the bind address, setting up the data center. All of that's pulled in from a set of variables deployed out using Packer and the Ansible builder inside, or Ansible provisioner inside of Packer. So I highly recommend, if you're building out environments, getting into the Packer flow of how you use Packer to build those images is just a really easy way to make sure these are consistently the same every time. So this was built last night. I did a refresh on it. We're building out that image using this Packer file. We're deploying it with Terraform. So I'm going to fire off the Terraform deployment. So we'll do let's do the auto approve on it. Oh. So So that's going to run. It's going to take a little bit to finish. So I'm not going to have everybody sit here and watch the screen as it deploys because, like I said, it's going to take a couple to finish up, but we can actually see it starting to build those out inside of the environment now. So Terraform's handling, making sure that this is deployed consistently. So I have that definition of what this environment is, and I can repeat this demo anytime I want. So with that being said, we've set the lay of the land. We're going to get back to these servers in a little bit after Peter goes through part of his, and we'll actually go through configuring both the fault tolerance with redundancy zones, words are hard, and also automatic upgrades in the environment. So Peter, back to you, buddy.
Thanks, Cody. So hopefully that helps everybody. We're doing this little cooking show style, get everything in the oven ready to go. And then when we get to Cody's demo, we'll be good. So let me go ahead and reshare my screen here. Cool. Cody, can you just confirm that sharing my slide?
You're all good, sir.
Thank you. So we just threw a lot of terms at you. You're probably familiar with a lot of our products, but we thought it'd be good just for everybody on here to still step back for a second and say kind of what is Consul. We mentioned Terraform in there, we mentioned Packer, and we're obviously going to really be focusing on Consul. A lot of you who joined today are probably familiar with it, but still just good for a review standpoint. So as you all know, you've probably seen this slide before if you've joined one of our other webinars. We have this theory that basically there are 4 main workflows that you need to solve when you're moving into more of a multi-cloud environment. So from the provisioning layer, that's where Terraform comes in. We have the security layer with Vault. Consul is the connect layer where we're talking about networking, and then at the runtime layer is going to be things like Nomad. You may also have some Kubernetes in there, maybe some JREs, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a number of different things that you can use, but the idea is that really what you're trying to solve at each of these different layers is a workflow problem. It's not necessarily just like plugging in a tool, because you're moving from a very different methodology from what you were doing previously. So in the case of Consul, we're moving away from that kind of host-based, static IP-based type of networking to more of a service-based dynamic IP. And what we mean by that is just that the idea is that things are kind of instantly in flux. Services are being spun up and down. They're being deployed in multiple regions, multiple clouds. You need a way that's a little bit more dynamic and not based on like manual tasks and tickets. All right, so that's where Consul tries to solve things. Really what we're trying to do is provide a good foundation for you to build your network on in the cloud. Or in this case, maybe it's a private data center. So like Cody's doing his demo today in vSphere, maybe you have some that are in a private data center, maybe you have some that are in public cloud. Either way, what you want to do is just have a consistent methodology for being able to create a shared registry for service-based networking. So if you look at it across the whole, the idea is that we're trying to allow network operations to kind of be decoupled from IP addresses. And really what we're talking about is kind of abstracting above that layer and essentially looking at it from the sense of, if I know what the service is and I know what it's supposed to be doing, can I call it by name or IP address depending on what I have? And then additionally, can I add automated services on top of that? So can I add security-based routing? Can I add things like service segmentation? When we talk more about like the service mesh things that you've probably heard us talk about in the past, that's where we're adding in additional policies and additional encryption methods that using TLS. That's going to be something that we want to make sure is dynamic, that I'm not having to do manually. But at the base layer, we also want to make sure that services are easily discoverable. So because I have this kind of large footprint of where services are going to be running, I want to make sure that I can find them on demand and that I'm able to connect to them and I'm able to get kind of be able to ping a service to make sure that it's reachable. And then that's where the last piece on here is talking about capturing that telemetry data. So if a service is unreachable, I should be able to know that without having to send a ping to it, right? Like, so Consul can provide me those real-time updates if I'm using it in the UI, or I can actually export that third-party tool. So if I'm using an APM solution, then I would be able to actually have Consul notify that APM solution when services become unreachable. And the way we've always talked about Consul and all of our products in general is this idea of transitioning from a single individual user to a large scale enterprise that's deploying our tools. And so the way that Consul is broken down is the same way. A lot of the stuff we're going to be talking today, the features we're going to be covering today are primarily their enterprise features. And the reason for that is that really what we're trying to solve with enterprise features is this idea of an organization-wide problem. So when you look at resiliency and recovery, what we're really trying to help is something that if your application goes down, this is going to affect the entire business. It's not just going to affect the individual user who's maybe managing that service. And so to help combat that, if you're going to be relying on Consul for an enterprise-wide deployment or for enterprise business applications that are critical and potentially costly if they go down, that's where those features, that's where you're going to want to have that enterprise package. And that's what we're going to kind of move into. Okay. Cool. So resiliency and recovery. Well, basically what we like to call the other R&R. Everybody's heard this phrase. It's a pretty famous one, obviously, that the best offense is a good defense. Whether you heard it from playing sports, or whether you've heard it just from the general art of war type of philosophy, the whole idea is that really the best offense is that if I've solidified my position in such a way that I will not need to be super reactive or have to dedicate a lot of resources to make something happen. And so when we talk about this, what we're saying is that if I configure my deployment in such a way that it is very resilient and very hardened and very ready for scale, I'm not going to need to attack outages. I'm not going to need to have to go chasing fires. I'm really set up a great sprinkler system where it's going to put them out as they pop up. And also it's going to prevent those things from happening because I've taken the necessary precautions. So what does that mean in terms of like, how does that apply to the features that we're talking about? So when we talk about resiliency and recovery, really what we're saying is that from a resiliency standpoint, you want to make sure that you're building a network that can support services that are running at a massive scale. So the thing that I want to make sure that I can do is that if I'm running Consul for a certain number of services, and then I increase that number of services, I want to make sure that my Consul deployment is able to handle that. There are going to be certain times, and one of the things that is a great feature that we have, that you may get a sudden increase in demand, and you may not be ready for that right off the bat. Rather than having to go through the process of resizing your Consul pieces, your Consul nodes, Consul has the capability of the thing that we call enhanced read scalability, where it's going to allow you to add non-voting members to your Consul cluster. And what that means is that if I notice an increase in terms of the incoming requests to my network, what I can actually do is promote one of those to participate in the cluster and essentially offload some of that traffic. So now what I've done is I've said, okay, I'm not having Consul have to resolve all these DNS queries. What I can do is I can bring in another node to essentially help out with that. And that's, again, being that proactive type of methodology. Now, nothing's perfect. There are going to be circumstances where we have to make sure that we have a recovery instance. And I really want to build that sprinkler system like I talked about, where I can quickly put out the fire and restore back to a stable state with the lowest amount of loss. And that's what Cody's going to talk about in his demo. What we talk about is redundancy zones. So redundancy zones is essentially taking some of those non-voting members and telling them, look, Consul, if you sense that there is an outage somewhere in the cluster and we're no longer able to achieve a quorum, promote one of these non-voting members to a voting member so that it can then participate, and we don't run into a circumstance where I no longer am able to resolve quorum, I'm no longer able to elect a leader, and things go bad. So I talked on two of the features, but here are some of the things that I'm going to walk through each of what these different features are and how they're going to be able to help you. So from a resiliency standpoint, we look at things like read scalability. That's where I talked about those non-voting members that are going to be able to help. Network segments is another one. We're going to dive into these a little bit more as far as what they are, advanced federation and automated upgrades. And then from the recovery, the reactive side, I have redundancy zones and automated backups. So let's actually dive through each of these features, because I think it's important to kind of fully understand what it is we're trying to accomplish here. So from the resiliency standpoint, I mentioned enhanced read scalability. So what enhanced read scalability does is it allows you to be able to run Consul at a massive scale for a massive number of services, because what I'm doing is I'm enabling additional nodes to be available for increased demand without increasing my operational burden. Those members that I put in there as part of those read scalability nodes are not participating in quorum. They're not voting. So they're just reading information. They're just being up to date with things that are happening, but they're not processing any of their requests. They're not trying to be a part of a larger network of Consul nodes. What I'm able to do is say, okay, if I happen to see that spike in terms of increased traffic coming to my network, I can flip one of those easily, and it's basically a pre-configured performance ready node that can participate in the quorum. The network segment piece is more like, maybe I don't have this massive multi-region deployment. Maybe I have just a handful of data centers that I really want to make sure that there's a number of groups that are within that are all optimally using their services. But I don't need all those services to be able to communicate with each other. It's either going to cause a lot of LAN gossip traffic. It's going to cause an additional strain on Consul. What I can use is I can use this thing that we call network segments, and basically say I can map those services to maybe my existing network topology and look at it and say, all right, I have data center 1 that needs to talk to data center 3 and data center 2, but data center 2 does not need to talk to data center 3. And what that is going to allow me to do is say, all right, well, I can actually enforce that by using network segments to stipulate that all the services that are running in data center 2 participate in a gossip pool with data center 2 and 3, but 2 and 3 don't need to be able to share gossip. And that's going to create this, maybe this like kind of hub and spoke type of architecture that we've heard about, which is going to be able to run a lot more efficiently the more and more nodes that you kind of add, and the more services and more data centers that you add to your existing environment. Some more of the resiliency features that we are talking about here. Advanced federation, essentially what this is allowing you to do is stipulate that, again, those data centers are only able to communicate with each other across regions now. So if I have multiple regions and I've conducted a discovery, maybe I don't need every single service in data center 1 to talk to every single service in data center 2. What I can do is I can actually link them using WAN gossip. And so what I essentially would do is have this big distributed network where I'm saying, all right, these agents are going to be able to talk to these agents, and they're going to share all of their information with this other agent who will be able to route the requests across those different regions. So think of network segments as within a data center. So on the LAN, think of advanced federation participating across multi-regions based on the LAN. And then the automated upgrades piece. This one is really, it seems kind of funny to say like this is a resiliency feature, but it totally makes sense. Right, automated upgrades is going to help you kind of support like a zero downtime for your upgrades, because it's going to have that kind of rolled versioning. And what that's going to allow me to do is make sure that I don't run into this issue of having outdated versions of Consul. Like maybe there's going to be a circumstance where we've made a great patch that's going to help something, or there's going to be a breaking change in one version to the other. Well, rather than having to have this whole planned outage for your open source version, what you can do is you can let Consul take care of itself. And what Consul will do is say, all right, I'm going to upgrade each of these nodes. And then once I achieve a majority of having the newest version, I'm going to start to retire other nodes that are running on the old versions. So I'm not going to run into the issue where I have to have this really elongated outage period where I have to essentially spend a weekend scaling down my entire network, upgrading everything, and then trying to bring it back online. I can allow Consul to be able to do that a little bit with a little bit less friction over a course of time, and with minimal issues to the rest of your network. So now let's switch over to the recovery side. Just talked a lot about resiliency features. So what happens when things go wrong? The two features that we really talk about here, which are great, are automated backups and redundancy zones. Automated backups are exactly what they say they are. Essentially, what it's going to do is going to allow you to enable a highly reliable backup process for disaster recovery. So let's say that I have a misconfiguration and I've lost data. I check my catalog doesn't have any of my services registered anymore. What do? I'm able to actually roll back to a previous snapshot of Consul. And what the advantage of the automated piece is that I don't have to do this on a certain time cadence. Consul will do this based on the time period that you want it to do, the way you configure it, and it's going to automatically take those snapshots for you. It's going to store them, and you're going to be able to pull them in the case that something goes wrong and there's a misconfiguration. The redundancy zones piece is really, really critical. So this idea is we talked about those read scalability nodes. I now have all these non-voting members that are out there that are ready to help when called upon. Well, the idea of redundancy zones is that Consul can call them automatically without you having to do it. So it's not a matter of like an increase in terms of service traffic. It's maybe one of my nodes goes down. Maybe I lose connectivity to one of my data centers, or maybe there's a regional outage. Maybe like one of the cloud regions is experiencing some hiccups and my instance is no longer reachable. And now my Consul servers are trying to rebalance themselves and they're trying to elect a new leader. Well, what Consul can do is sense that, all right, I don't have enough to actually achieve quorum. I don't have enough to be able to elect a new leader. Well, I have these non-voting members that are available. So I'm going to do is I'm going to promote one of them to become a part of the voting pool, and they're going to be able to help me elect a leader. And so what you've done is said, okay, Consul solve this for me, be my sprinkler system in case there's a fire, and I'm not getting pinged at 2 a.m. on a Saturday because there is an outage and I happen to be the one who's holding the pager that for the on-call duty uptime. So let's put this kind of in a real world context of how this applies to a customer. So imagine you as a customer saying, all right, I'm using Consul open source right now for service discovery. It's working great. I'm very happy with it. Let's talk about those things that could go wrong. Maybe there's a sudden increase in traffic. Maybe you had a delay in the connection request. So if let's say I have a service that is essentially fielding my DNS requests and passing those to Consul for resolution. What happens if that service is no longer passing those requests? Maybe there's a backlog, maybe it just needs to do a reset, something. And then once it comes back online, it reachieves that connection with the Consul agent, it just floods that Consul agent with a whole bunch of service requests. And then as you're trying to scale and trying to react to that, that node happens to crash, and then the entire system goes out. Read scalability and redundancy zones are going to be able to prevent that. Again, I'm being proactive with read scalability because I said, all right, I'm going to keep some standby nodes ready that if I happen to see that increased traffic, I just flip another one of those nodes to become voting and make sure that it's going to be able to help handle that traffic. And if there is an outage, I have these backups that are available for me that I'm not going to have to worry about it, recovering on the fly and hoping that I deploy in time before I run into that outage. What I can do is I could say, Consul, take care of this for me, make sure that we're going to be up and running and that we have a backup plan in place. So that was a very kind of high level overview of all the different enterprise features that we're trying to cover on here. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it back over to Cody, who's going to check on our status of our servers, and he's going to walk us through how to actually use those redundancy zones. Cody?
Thanks, Peter. All right, I'm going to fire back up sharing. Peter, if you can just confirm for me the second it comes back up, I'd really appreciate that.
You're good.
Fantastic. All right, give me 1 second to prep one more thing. All right, so our environment's been deployed. We're going to switch back over to the command line. We can see I've got my cluster up and running. Just full transparency, the way I built the servers, they all joined the same cluster initially. So I went ahead and left them. I don't think I've ever had this many SSH windows open at once. So that's a first for me. So if we take a look at our Terraform window, we can see things built. We can see my shoddy Terraform code where I left some undeclared variables. So oops, my bad. I need to get Kyle to help me fix that. But we'll close that window out because we successfully added 36 resources. That's because we added our machines as well as appropriate DNS entries for them into the lab environment. So we can close out the Terraform part. We're done with that now. And there's my actual cluster with showing that the ones I had left out. So this is what our environment will ultimately end up looking like when we get there. Fun tip, the 1.8 release candidate, which is not the fully GA'd version, but the release candidate was released yesterday. So if anybody's checking out Consul 1.8, I highly recommend going and pulling down the RC. There's a lot of good stuff in this update. We had a lot of ground to cover, so I'm going to fly through these next few parts. Before I jump into actually working in the command line, I wanted to give a shout out to our Learn. So HashiCorp Learn has a ton of great guides. I actually use these guides to set up this demo. So if you take a look, we have one for the redundancy zone specifically, automatic upgrades, and then I also included the data center backups one. There's an agent functionality that Peter talked about, the data or the Consul snapshot agent that allows you to like automatically run backups and send them out to like S3 or whatever blob stores you want to send it to. But these guides are great. They'll help you get the stuff running really quick. Like I said, I was able to use this stuff to set it up. So definitely give those a read, give those a watch. You'll notice some similarities between my code and the stuff in there because they were that good. So we're going to jump in now and have some fun. So right out of the gate, I need to set up a couple of things in order for redundancy zones to come online. I need to set up some zone metadata. So we're going to go into, oops. We're going to go in and we're going to take a look at my Consul configuration. We're going to set up our zone metadata in each one of these configuration files. So we'll go ahead and do vim against this directory, and we'll drop in our zone metadata. It doesn't really matter where, and I'm going to leave it offset. It doesn't matter. That's still just JSON, so it's going to catch it. But you'll see I've set this server to be part of zone 1. So we'll write that file out, and we'll do a reload on the configuration. We'll do the same thing on this one. We're going to set this one to zone 2. Do a console reload again. And spoiler alert, we're also going to set this one to 3. So we've now got the baseline settings in place for redundancy zones on our server cluster. So right now, Consul understands that server 1, server 2, and server 3 have zone 1, 2, and 3 associated with them. So this in public cloud, this is analogous to having like 3 different availability zones or 3 different regions that you have the server running in with like peering between them. So the idea here is that these live in different environments, and you've set up specific recovery concepts for each one of those zones. So in public or in private cloud, these could be like different isolated environments. It could be like a server between different sites. If you had like a low latency connection between data centers, like there's different scenarios where in private cloud, this would have been in play, likely in more of like a connection constrained type of environment. So now servers 1, 2, and 3 have those settings in place. We're going to turn on the operator configuration for redundancy zones. Switch back to 1, doesn't really matter which one I run this out of. So we're going to set like operator autopilot and set config for redundancy zones tag to zone. And that's just it's just a friendly tag that says, hey, like to understand that these are part of the same redundancy zone, use this tag to reference them. So if I do now console operator autopilot, we can see the different options there. We'll do a get config though. So we'll do get config. And we can see that we have set the redundancy zone tag to zone. So now we're going to update 4, 5, and 6 to have the same zone metadata, but also add an additional tag for the redundancy zone tag. So we'll switch over to 04. I realize this is probably really small and not helping anybody. So make that a little bit bigger for everybody. So now, because I've set this one to zone 1, this one effectively pairs up with Consul 01. So now Consul 01 knows that, or Consul as a platform itself understands that Consul 04 is effectively the redundancy zone for, or part of the redundancy zone for 01. So if 01 loses connectivity, loses quorum, 04 will be promoted up to a voting member and become effectively a server, like a full-blown server node in the environment. Funny comment while I update these. I made the mistake last night when I was going through doing my typical smoke test of my demo to make sure everything's good. I actually forgot to update what I just copy and pasted in. So when I copy and paste it in, you'll notice that I'm kind of copying and pasting from like a template that I have set up for all my steps. And I left this zone 1 the same on a bunch of them, and then spent an hour troubleshooting why this wasn't working and panicking that Peter was going to yell at me today for a failed demo, only to find that I just didn't update these to different zones. So make sure when you copy and paste that you check your work. All right, so these are now updated. We're going to go ahead and start Consul back up on these 3 nodes. And we'll go ahead and pop back over here. And we'll just check our Raft peers list. So we can see we now have 3 voting nodes in place, and we have 3 non-voting nodes in place. We're going to go ahead and throw a watch command on this. And for those who aren't, bash friendly, watch just will run that command every 2 seconds by default, just to keep an eye on it for changing. So the environment's set now. If we lose one of our voting nodes, which are 1, 2, and 3, we should see it promote up, or promote one of those non-voting nodes up. So in order to do that, we're just going to go over to number 3, I think. Yeah, we'll go to number 3 and we'll just stop the service. We'll switch back. A few moments, we'll see 3 drop out of the list. 3 is gone. And in a few more moments, we can see 6 was just promoted up. And that's because of the way I set up the peering between those. 1 was peered to 4, 2 was peered to 5, 3 was peered to 6. So we can see that promoted up to 3. Quorum's been reestablished in the cluster now, which means that write operations start back up again. The servers know about each other. Everything's talking happy. And this was an automatic action. Like, this is definitely a 2 a.m. call, right? Like when I was in operations and working with things that get you 2 a.m. calls, this would have definitely, like, if we did not use redundancy zones here, losing one of those nodes in the cluster is definitely a 2 a.m. phone call to come back on and fix why the cluster's down. So like having this in place automatically recovers that and saves you from that 2 a.m. call. And more importantly, it saves you from an outage. It saves you from people asking why the app was down overnight, why Consul was sideways and not functioning, which we've heard stories about previously where people had like not configured scaling correctly or had environments that were not tuned correctly, and they lose quorum on one of their nodes because of some action inside of the environment, and they don't have a way to automatically promote. So I can't stress enough, like this is probably one of the most powerful features of Enterprise that goes overlooked sometimes. So that's done. It's the next day. We've come back in. We fixed our server. We're going to go ahead and bring this one back online now. Actually, we're going to go back and bring 3 online. And what's really cool about this is that the recovery happens in 2 ways, or in 2 directions. So now I've brought it back online and we can see 3 is in the bottom of my list down here on the bottom. And it's set, excuse me, it's set as a non-voter node, but it's back as part of the cluster. If I go and stop the service on 06, it will actually fail it back out again. So it'll actually like depromote. Well, if I shut off the server on 06, it's going to drop out of the list. But then 03 is going to promote up to being a voter again, as we would expect it to. And then when I start the service on 6 again, everything's going to come back. So we'll pop back over to 6. We'll stop Consul on that. We'll go back over here again. And in a few moments, we should see 03 promote back up into being a voter in the cluster again. And then to get us back to a steady, happy place, we'll go ahead and start that service back up. Now, while this is starting back up and stabilizing back out, I want to highlight something here. You'll notice I'm not, like in my typical demos, I always deploy an application, and Peter and I are usually talking about service mesh in some way, and we're connecting services together, and we're talking about things like traffic splitting and progressive delivery, and how we take environments that are very static and make them very dynamically connected. And we talk about adoption of mesh. We talk about all these things constantly, and this is a very different webinar because we're not touching on that at all. What I want to relate back on that is that the things we're doing here are setting a foundation so that stuff works for a very long time safely, right? Because you can't have a service meshed environment without functioning service discovery. And you can't have a functioning service discovery without a good foundation that has been built on that's not going to fall over on you. Because once that quorum's lost and we're not able to write new services, you're going to have issues with registering new services. And when you can't register new services, you can't mesh them together. So while this may be a little bit, just being kind of blunt, this might be a little bit more of a boring demo in the sense of like, well, we're not seeing applications. We don't have the pretty apps that Cody and Peter write, like showing up on the screen and boxes going from red to green. What we're doing here is setting this up so that we have foundationally a sound environment, so that when we build that stuff on top of it, we're less concerned with having outages. We're less concerned with problems in the environment. So like, while it is boring a little bit, I think it's pretty cool to watch servers automatically recover, but I'm also a nerd in that way. It's also important to understand that none of the advanced functionality works right without having a good foundation built to make sure that you're running a long time. And that's part of, like, I give that speech leading into the next part where we talk about automatic upgrades. So Consul Enterprise has the ability to automatically do upgrades in an environment. And that's a little scary for people in operations at first, because you think, I don't want you to upgrade my environment at 2 o'clock in the morning when I'm asleep, and then I have some sort of regression and it breaks. But think about this more. Think about it less as an automatic upgrade and think about it more as a hands-off upgrade. because what we're able to do also, not just in the sense of upgrading to new versions, that's cool in its own way, but I typically would want to control the way I upgrade environments and version upgrades. What's more exciting to me is the ability to set node versions. And that's what we're going to do in this demo. We're going to set up 3 of these nodes to have a node version of .01. And what that's saying is, hey, inside of my enterprise, inside of my environment, these are the .01 version of these servers. I don't care what binary is running on them. I don't care if it's 1.7, 1.8, whatever. In this case, it's going to be, they're all running 1.8, but maybe I've made some critical infrastructure changes to the version 2. Maybe I've bumped up the size on them. Maybe I've added new storage. I've moved from one storage array to another, and I didn't want to do like a live migration. I wanted to gradually like migrate over or something like that. I'm going to use the automatic upgrades to say, hey, when these 3 new servers come online, go ahead and demote the old ones out and let these ones replace and become the new leaders for the environment. So let's jump in and take care of that now. We're going to go in and we're going to play with a few, a new set of the node metadata. So we'll go server HCL, and we're going to add on to this zone 1, this build metadata. Keep spacing over. Shouldn't do that. All right, so that node metadata is set now. We're going to do a similar command to the one we did before, where we set a configuration value for setting the upgrade version tag to build, which means that when new servers come in that have that tag as part of their autopilot configuration, they're going to get that, or they're going to, like, the system's going to know that that tag is present, and they're going to treat that as systems that upgrade. It's important to note that the upgrade will only kick off when it has a matching number of servers. So in this case, we set this configuration on 3 of the nodes. It's going to wait for 3 to have the new node data before it actually does the upgrade. So we're going to hop over to the new servers now, which I've aptly named Consul New. And clever like that. And I've got some handy configurations over here. Looking good. Node metadata 2. Save. Save. I bet you didn't know that this was also a webinar on repeating the same commands in Vim over and over again. All right, we're going to go ahead and bring these servers online. And it's going to be a little tricky because we're going to want to time this and be very fast, because what will end up happening is the second all 3 of these come online, the system's going to recognize that there's an upgrade available, and it's going to initiate that upgrade. So what I'm going to do actually first is I'm going to switch back over to this fellow right here. And we're going to go and do our watch command now so we can see it. So just to confirm, we have voters 1, 2, and 3, or we have our main servers as 1, 2, and 3 as voters, and then 4, 5, and 6 are still operating in the redundancy zone config. So let's go ahead and go startup console, and yes, startup console. And those are up. With any luck, in a few moments, we'll see it actually kick off and start doing its actual upgrade. So you can see those 2 just flip to true on the bottom. 3 are all true now. And the demotion usually takes a little bit longer, so we might actually like not have time to see the actual demotion. It waits for everything to kind of stabilize out and for it to be kind of a safe environment before it actually demotes those down. So we might not get to actually see it demote those 3 down, the 1, 2, and 3 down, but it will actually, after things stabilize, demote those down. It's gonna, because R01 is the leader. You might see it in a few moments here if we have time. I think I'd hand over to Peter here in about 2 minutes or so. We'll see this start to error out potentially where it says it has no leader available. That's because 1 is the leader and it's going to demote down. So new 1 or new 2, new 3, one of those is going to take over and become the new lead. So that'll happen. We'll see an error probably. Yeah. So we'll give it just a moment here. I don't expect us to have time to actually see the demotion happen because when I was testing it out, it took a little while, but it does actually happen. The important thing to note is that we do have the 3 new servers operating as leaders in the environment now. They are effectively serving new traffic. So.
Hey, Cody, while that's going, we had a question about this come in. So how does it, like the change that you just made, affect the client IP addresses when the servers are changed?
Yeah, that's a good point. So typically what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to use some form of like a DNS in front of Consul to send traffic to Consul. So likely you're going to have to handle adding those to like that DNS record on the back end. Like typically if you're statically setting your 3 nodes, like, yeah, you're whoever asked this question, you're totally right. If you're statically on your clients doing like the join. So while this is going, I can switch over to the server config. You'll notice I have like a dynamic config in here that's set up to use vSphere tags. You can do this with AWS, GCP, Alibaba, all of these have this ability to use this. But if I had statically set these in here and done like .20, .21, .22, yeah, your clients would drop and they would have a problem here. So we typically recommend either using the cloud auto join capabilities, which is this, so you have the more dynamic join, or having some form of like an addressing set in front of it, typically like a DNS of some sort that sits in front and tells it to that tells it what the backend addresses are, like A records behind it, for example. Most safe and stable is to do the cloud-based auto join though, and to tell it to use like either vSphere tags, AWS tags, GCP tags, so on and so forth. Yeah, it's taken a little while to finish this up. It typically, like I said, it took a few minutes last night. I'm not surprised that it took a little while or that it hasn't finished yet. It does take a bit to actually do the demotion because it doesn't want to wreck your environment by completely demoting them down. So it takes a little while. Peter, we can go ahead and bring this home.
Yeah, so at this point, we're gonna go ahead and open it up for questions. We did have a couple of questions come in we've been answering, but go ahead and enter any additional ones that you have, and we can go ahead and try to give our answers to those. One question, Cody, just like in general, and I know you and I had been talking about this previously. So we talked a lot about enterprise features. We understand that like enterprise may not be right for everybody, and that some folks may want to try some additional things to do in their open source environments. What would you recommend that folks do to kind of build out a really resilient Consul deployment just using the open source, and what are some capabilities that are available to them?
Yeah, so Peter kind of hit early on that like the strength of enterprise is really about simplifying the way that you operate a quote unquote at scale Consul environment. And scale doesn't always mean size of an environment, right? I'm not talking 10,000 nodes here. If Peter, myself, and our boss Ray, who's on the call also, are all on the same team, that's its own version of scale, right? That's 3 operators working inside of an environment. Probably not that scary, but if you look at all of the support team we have on the call right now, it's like 6 or 7 folk. That starts to get kind of large. And that starts to kind of break up your management of your environment in an interesting way. So enterprise is about simplifying that as well. Now, if you're not looking at enterprise, you can still pull off similar simplifications, but you're going to be building manual things around it. For example, we have one of the enterprise features is the snapshot agent to automatically take snapshots and dump those out to S3. I could probably write 50 lines of bash that would take care of that for me and automatically do that. But guess what? I own that 50 lines of bash now. And when I change jobs 3 times inside the company, I guarantee you, I would bet my kids' college fund that 50 lines of bash is going to follow me for the entirety of my career at that place. And I'm probably going to get messages from my friends after I leave that company about, hey, remember that 50 lines of bash you wrote? artisanally crafted automation sometimes has to happen because we have budgets and we have external factors. In a perfect world, we all just buy the things that we wanted to fix our problems. But there are reasons why sometimes we can't do that. We just have to weigh out if it makes sense to do that versus the baggage you're going to carry for a long time. I still get messages today from automation that I wrote at my previous company 6 years ago before I left. I get messages from colleagues there who say, hey, remember when you wrote this? Can you help me out? That stuff's going to follow you around for a long time. So yes, you can automate this stuff and you can write ways to do it. And there's probably smart things you can do, like the 50 lines of bash in the case of snapshot is probably a sensible thing to do if you can't buy enterprise, because having good backup process is very important. It's just weighing out, like, do you want to be the shepherd of this, again, artisanally crafted process? Same thing applies to like scaling nodes. We talked a lot about redundancy zones in this demo, and I went through the whole thing about showing those fail over. You can scale an environment with server nodes as well. Is it going to be as efficient as non-voter nodes? No. Like, there are going to be server nodes that are doing write operations. You're going to have your own like scaling concerns there, but you can scale that way. There's nothing stopping you from doing it. It's just one of those things like, should you do it? And how long should you do it for? If you're just entering into Consul and you're getting started now and you fully plan on buying enterprise, but you have to deal with buying cycle, like it's a thing in enterprise, right? Like you might know you're going to buy something, but it's going to take you 9 months to do it. Starting off that path isn't a terrible thing. Remedying it and going to that automated path down the road isn't a bad thing. It's totally possible to do. I just wouldn't recommend it at scale.
Awesome. Thanks, Cody. So we did have a question come in just about using the cloud, was it the cloud auto join tags? So you use those for VMware. And then another question was like, so let's say you were using GCP. Would you have to use those tags also for GCP VMs if you're going to do something like this?
You should. You provide it out. So like you give in GCP, I believe that the service account gets read access to the machine metadata, and you assign that tag. So then when the Consul servers join, they can actually read themselves, and they can read GCP and say, hey, who else has this tag in this category? And when those tags line up, it says all of us are in the same pool. We're going to join together and do a cluster. It's a really slick process. We haven't done a webinar specifically on it, but we really should, because the cloud auto join process, when I first came aboard, so I've been at HashiCorp about 6 months now, and I remember like one of the big questions I had when I came aboard was like, this seems odd. It seems odd that I have to like manually append like 3 to 5 IP addresses in a list here to get these to join. Like, what happens in a dynamic environment? And then I discovered cloud auto join, and I'm like, whoa, that's a mind blow moment, because like I have full dynamic now. If I just rip one of these out, throw it away, and deploy a new one, cloud auto join is going to kick in and bring that into the cluster and handle it. So yeah, short answer. I went on a rant there, so sorry about that. But it'll read the tags on itself, and it'll join any others in that pool. Same thing for AWS, Alibaba, so on and so forth.
Awesome. Thanks, Cody. So we did have an answer for one of the questions that came in here asking about using a flat VPC and a flat subnet in GCP. So basically, like if you're using a flat network where both the dev and prod are joined under the flat network, then you could logically create kind of a dev and prod logical separation. So we don't have like namespace nodes, which would specifically limit which nodes reside in the namespaces, but nodes that are within the cluster, because they share RAF data, you can register services specifically on those dev and prod nodes within that corresponding namespace. So essentially what you'd want to do is just make sure that you're only registering services within the namespace that you want to operate in that namespace. Hey, Cody, so one that came in, we had, let's see. So if I have 6 nodes in an auto scaling group, is there a way I can dynamically set 3 of those to be non-voters?
There's not a way to dynamically set it, unfortunately. At least not that I know of, and one of the PMs might speak up and tell me I'm wrong, and that'll be embarrassing. But to my knowledge, there's not a way to dynamically set a non-voter versus voter. What I would typically do in that case is I would have 2 auto scaling groups, one for server nodes and one for the redundant nodes, and configure them separately, so I could scale up my redundant nodes in their own way. That's probably the route that I would go. But there's not a way to do it dynamically that I'm aware of. If the PM's on the call who knows a different way, please feel free to speak up, but not that I know of.
Awesome. And then I may not be as familiar with this one, but Cody, is there auto join for Proxmox? I'm not familiar with that
Wow.
terminology.
So Proxmox is a type of a hypervisor. Geez, I will check right now.
Awesome. Well, he's pulling that up. One of the things I do want to remind folks, because we did have a number of Kubernetes questions, I did want to let people know that a lot more of the service mesh discussion and things around Kubernetes, we will be covering into a couple of different sessions at HashiConf next week. So I do recommend that if you're interested in that, either check out some of the resources that are on our website. I dropped a few that were in the answer link, but then also wanted to make sure that you all know that we do have HashiConf coming up. There's a lot of great sessions. We're going to be doing a lot of cool console materials. Cody's going to be doing a couple demos specifically about some service mesh functionality. So definitely make sure you go register for that as well at hashiconf.com. So Cody, it looks like you found something.
Yeah, so I don't see Proxmox listed in the list of available cloud auto join. So it's not on the formal list. So I'm going to say no, that we don't.
Okay, let me pull up my sheet here, see what other questions we have. Oh, here's a good one. So we had a question come in actually on the YouTube channel. So Cody, do we use HCL for console?
Yeah, so I use JSON just because, like I said, I've only been for 6 months. I haven't been indoctrinated to HCL fully yet. So I tend to, my brain sometimes defaults into JSON. We definitely, many of our config files are HCL based, and you can switch between HCL or JSON when it comes to config. Sorry, Mitchell, for not using HCL for my console. Please don't yell at me.
Okay. Then we did have a question come in asking about console working with Windows. Yes, it does. We'll go ahead and drop the link in here. Make sure that gets dropped into the YouTube live chat as well. Yeah, so we do have Windows binaries. They can all be downloaded on our site. So yes, we support Linux and Windows. Let's see if we had any other questions coming in. Okay. Okay. Yeah, so currently, so we had a question come in about Console Connect using Envoy proxies with Windows. Yeah, that's on our roadmap for things. Cody, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's something that we're looking at, being able to add that functionality in future releases.
Yeah, because it's still like a very early thing in Envoy in general. It's just not, obviously, like we can't support it until it's fully, or we're not supporting it until it's fully like baked in Envoy. So it is something we actively have conversations about. It's something I would absolutely say, keep an eye on, where it's on the way. So yeah, it's coming.
Awesome. Okay, we'll take a last call for any questions on here.
Yeah, and real quick, while we bring that up, I was just going back in and double checking the environment again. Our nodes did deprioritize down to non-voter nodes successfully. So it did finish up and demote those down to non-voter nodes, and the only voting nodes right now are 1, 2, and 3. So.
Okay, success. All right. Here's a question. So I think this is a good one. Cody, how would you say that GitOps integrates with console? So I know obviously like there's this terminology, and we talk about it a little bit on the progressive delivery side, but
oh man,
what would be your thoughts around that?
So it's funny this comes up because I had a long conversation with a couple of the SE team down in Australia last night, and this is something like I want to unpack in a webinar soon because I think there's some really interesting stories here. So there's a whole bunch of like GitOps things that can be done with Consul Connect specifically. Things that pop into my mind right out of the gate. Think about how you can template a configuration file as part of a pipeline. So when you commit code into GitHub, you could have it automatically update your service registration file and then handle going out and deploying that via your pipeline. So if you're using like a cloud native Kubernetes as an example, you could have that Kubernetes endpoint set up in your pipeline inside of like maybe GitLab pipeline, Circle CI, something like that, and have that new registration apply, updating a service live or registering a new service, bringing a new service online. So that's like one path that's very, very basic. And I can see that being very valid for like dev environments, right? I build a new update to my, like Peter and I have been playing around with React a lot. And it might be that I create an update to my React application and I push a service definition for it. And my pipeline handles going and building the Docker container, bringing that service registration file into that Docker container, and then deploying or creating like a Kubernetes YAML, a deployment manifest to deploy it onto a cluster. And it automatically deploys onto my Kubernetes cluster, letting me know that, hey, here's the application endpoint. And then when I go into Consul, I automatically see it there. It's part of the mesh automatically. So that's part one. But I can also see a very valid part two where we take it one step further and we apply a service splitter. So we have this layer 7 routing capabilities in Consul that allow you to do traffic management. And the one I harp on the most is traffic splitting typically, because when I deploy a new service, I don't want to cut it over. I don't want to say 100% of my traffic goes from A to B. I want to say 95% of my traffic goes to A. Every so often I want somebody to hit B so I can make sure the world doesn't fall apart when somebody hits that system. So I think the next step of that GitOps flow is it's deployed. Now let's apply a splitter automatically that says, hey, take services and split them up between these new ones. So my new service that just came online gets 5% of my traffic, so I can say if things are good. And then I want my pipeline to have an apply or deny step. And if I hit apply, or say approve rather, not apply, if I say approve, it goes ahead and rolls that into production and applies the same split to my production environment. So I can have this really clean flow. And all of that works because of GitOps, right? Because I can commit this code into Git. And there's various ways of interacting with that Git repo from a pipeline standpoint. So it's really how we bring like the CI/CD concept into, as well as GitOps, which is kind of part of CI/CD, how we bring that into practical application delivery, and how we take these modern applications and make modern application networking a part of that flow. So that's something that, like, Peter and my boss Ray, who's on the call, they'll tell you, I get hyped up on this and I'll rant about it for 45 minutes on a call, and they'll ask me to stop talking about it, but it's all right. I'm still going to do it. So
thanks, Cody. All right, we're at the top of the hour here. We're going to go ahead and wrap it up. So thank you, Cody. Really appreciate you walking us through all the demos. We hope that you all learned a little bit about how we approach kind of resiliency and recovery when it comes to Consul Enterprise. As I mentioned, it has been recorded. We'll be posting it to our website along with the questions that we put in there, as well as some of the slideware, and make it available for you, usually within about 1 to 2 days. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at any time. So thank you all for joining.
see you guys.